Good day everyone, welcome to this video, and today we're going to be doing a brief updated dive bombing guide for War Thunder. I'll be covering rockets in a separate video because they are an entirely different kettle of fish, and this is going to be an update. If you've obviously found my older guide, you'll have a link that is in the description / pinned comment. That will be to this video. So this one's going to be a little bit different to the one that we obviously covered in the previous one. Now, obviously, with that video, I mostly had cast recommendations covering a decent chunk of that video. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm mostly going to be talking about setting up your keyboard binds, so that way you can effectively use keyboard only if you wish. I'm going to be talking about bomb fuses and everything. I'm going to be talking about different sizes of bombs. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about setting up your controls, but that'll be towards the end. If you want to skip ahead to that, feel free to do so using the timestamps in the description below. And we'll obviously be covering the 4 different, shall we say, main classifications, if you could call them that, of aircraft you're likely to use. Such as light aircraft with light bombs, like this pea shooter. A P-39 will be demonstrating a normal-sized aircraft with a normal-sized bomb. The F4U-1A will be demonstrating a normal-sized aircraft with a larger bomb. And the PBJ-1H will be demonstrating your stereotypical what people think you should use for CAS, but you really shouldn't. And, well, we're going to cover why when we get to that vehicle. But anyway, so we're going to start out with the light aircraft with light bombs. So this will typically be your early sort of aircraft. And some aircraft will even carry this on up into the higher tiers, such as the A6M50, which can carry 2 60-kilogram bombs. As a result, it's all about knowing how to set the aircraft up and obviously learning about the individual aircraft. Now, as you play the vehicle, it is obviously going to be something that you learn anyway. You'll learn its strengths, its weaknesses, and besides, if you don't know them by the time you've at least spaded it or had a few games under your belt, there's going to be YouTube videos out there that will tell you each individual aircraft's weakness and give you general tips and tricks on how to do that. But of course, that varies. So when it comes to learning about a light aircraft with light bombs, the key to this is mainly the bombs. Now, this is important because these bombs are quite crap, I must admit. There's no sugarcoating it. These are quite poor bombs. With just 110 pounds in weight, which is ironic because they're called hundreds, and 24.5 kilograms of explosive mass, these aren't very powerful bombs. But obviously the pea shooter is a relatively light airframe, and as a result, it can really benefit it when it comes to that. Now, of course, there is a point to be made that obviously a pea shooter is not exactly the best example of this, but for some reason, the F3F, because I was going to use that in test flight, seems to break its prop, so that is kind of inconvenient, but I'm using the pea shooter because the F3F is a bit bugged right now in test flight, at least from when I tried it. So I'm going to be also using mainly the keyboard well, I'm not going to be using the keyboard aspect. I'm going to be using purely the mouse aim aspect. This is just to make it easier for newer players, but also I will obviously demonstrate how much of a difference that the keyboard binding can obviously make. Anyway, let's go and have a look in the test flight. And welcome to the test flight. So, as I've mentioned, I am going to English. I am going to be mentioning that there is obviously a few aspects to correctly be employing here to actually dive bomb efficiently with these aircraft. Now, as I said, these bombs aren't exactly very large, and on a moving target such as those vehicles down there, well, that vehicle down there I should say, it's not going to be easy. So with these sorts of vehicles, you really want to wait until your enemy is stationary. One thing to study as well is the anti-aircraft you're potentially going to run into. This is because you can then employ what you're planning, so to speak, and you can use your approach angles correctly. So what I want you to do is imagine that down there with the vehicles is a tank RB match. Now obviously we wouldn't have markers in this case, but well, it's a test flight, so it's not exactly the best example, but this is just to point it out. Now you'll notice I'm flying around the outskirts. I'm not flying directly in for this example. This is because I want to examine the area. I want to make sure, imagining that there's SPA, which in this case there actually is, I'd want to know exactly where that SPA is if it chooses to shoot at me. Some of the smarter players will only shoot once you get close enough. A lot of them, though, will not. So it's important to identify where those targets are and try to avoid them, as something like a pea shooter is extremely fragile to anti-aircraft guns. So when it comes to an attack angle, you want to set your bomb fuse for a light bomb like this to around 1 second. So, let's go in for a dive. Now obviously, if I was being shot at, I'd be maneuvering like so. I wouldn't just be sitting still. But obviously in this case I'm going to go for that so key, which you wouldn't really run into. But you've got to keep your maneuvers unpredictable. And in the case of a moving target, you've got to try and lead them. Now obviously with a 1 second fuse, well half a second in this case, it's not easy. And as you saw there, even that damaged me. And it's obviously a light bomb. But if your target's not moving and it's a normal tank, it's even not easy to do that, because the bomb is just that weak. You've really got to be more considerate when it comes to this, and obviously planning your bomb fuses is something you've got to do. Obviously I'm not going to get hits and kills every single time, that's not the intention to demonstrate here. But the point is that you can obviously demonstrate the fact that these light aircraft are extremely maneuverable for the most part. Obviously, a pea shooter is not exactly a biplane, but it's still quite maneuverable. And you can easily get bombs on target with it. But it's just a question of, can you get the bombs on target? And can you kill your target? And as you saw there, I took quite a bit of damage doing that with half a second fuse. So, even with light bombs, they can be incredibly dangerous to your aircraft if you're not careful. As you can see by my tail, it's already orange after a few bomb runs. We did manage to kill the tank, but that was quite dangerous to do. So it's all about making sure that you understand that there is obviously downsides to running a small bomb fuse. But we'll cover that more in detail as we go along the bomb sizes. Anyway, let's move on to the next bomb and next aircraft. See you shortly. So now we move on to a normal sized aircraft, because obviously the pea shooter is quite small, with a normal, typical, what you would carry on this sort of aircraft bomb. Now the 500-pound American bomb did get a buff as of recent. It was about a few months ago that this bomb actually got buffed. Gained about 24 kilograms of explosive mass, well, explosive mass in general. And that obviously really did benefit the bomb overall, and it does make it a lot easier to demonstrate with this bomb. Even though the normal American 500 was no slouch, but you get my point. So when it comes to a normal aircraft like this, obviously you do, in most cases, trade maneuverability. Now in some cases, like a Ki-61, you don't trade that. But obviously, in doing so, you get a larger profile as well. A P-39 is a lot easier to hit than a P-26, that I can tell you from experience. It is something you will have to bear in mind, and obviously if you've just skipped here from the opening and all that, you would see that the pea shooter is obviously quite a smaller aircraft to demonstrate with, so you've got to consider attack routes a little bit more. Now obviously when it comes to bomb fuses, in the pea shooter example, I was using a half a second fuse. This can be fatal, extremely fatal, if you use it on a 500-pound bomb. For this example, I'm going to use a 1.5 second fuse. This is a good size fuse to use for a 500-pound bomb, and will be more than safe to use in general. But obviously at lower speeds, if you're just dropping your bomb at low speeds, this still can be fatal to your aircraft, so just bear that in mind. Do make sure to practice this and use your bomb fuse that suits you. Anyway, let's go into the test flight and let's take a look at how the P-39 does. See you shortly. And welcome to the test flight. So, like I did in the pea shooter example, obviously if you've skipped ahead, you wouldn't know this, but what I'm doing is I'm imagining this area of the map on the test flight as a, shall we say, as a tank RB match. This is because it's a good example to really put into your mind, because then you can really follow on with what I'm trying to point out here. So obviously we're going to target the medium tank. That's going to be our target for today. Now, the important thing is to look out for anti-aircraft guns, study your anti-aircraft guns that you might run into, and obviously use your situational awareness to keep an eye out for enemy aircraft. Typically, fighters do tend to obviously have the role of dealing with enemy aircraft, so make sure to do that if you can. But if you're going for a dive bomb attack, you want to approach from a high angle as always. This gives you a more accurate drop, and most importantly, gives you a better angle in general. Now, do not fly at the target straight like this. You want to be unpredictable, pitching the elevators up and down, obviously if you're using keyboard binds, and then obviously dropping the bomb accordingly and getting it on target just like so. Now obviously if you're using mouse aim, you can still do that, but it's obviously not going to be as easy. This is mainly because the mouse aim doesn't give you the full elevator pitch, as far as I've been able to tell. So obviously at the minute, I'm using mouse aim to pitch the aircraft, and now I'll use the keyboard. So the keyboard pitch is a lot harder than the, I think it's about 30% difference, or something like that, on most aircraft at least. But as you can see, this plane handles very well with the keyboard. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the exact same attack run, but without using this. So I'm going to take my finger off, and now I'm using the keyboard. Well, not the keyboard, the mouse. Now I'm having to use a separate finger to actually operate the throttle due to a bug at the moment, but that's normal. So you want to approach in an angle where you can get your bomb on target and get the bomb closer to your target. Obviously, as you saw there, we almost hit the ground. If I was using the pitch control, I would have been a lot safer. But the important thing is to know is attack runs aren't always going to be 100% accurate. You're never going to kill your target 100% of the time. It's just not going to happen. But the important thing is to learn from areas where, well, most importantly, learn the maps, because you do not want to hit a tree whilst you're doing dive bombing. But the important thing is that you've just got to learn exactly what your aircraft can do and can't do, and learn the maps as well as the anti-aircraft guns that you'll be running into. This will take time, so don't expect to rush things. But once you get used to things, you can very easily drop bombs with prediction perfectly on target, just like so. Anyway, let's move on to the next aircraft, which has a bit of a larger bomb. See you shortly. And now we move on to something which I'm sure a lot of cast players are dreading, because this tends to be what you can do for the most part. Now obviously in the case of a Corsair, it's quite a high performance aircraft. It's got great speed, good handling, subpar acceleration, given it's got a lot of horsepower, but it does weigh quite a bit, so there is that. Now in the case of this aircraft, it carries a single 1,000 pound bomb, which is roughly around 500 kilo. This is on the larger side of aircraft-focused bombs for general cast work. And I'm sure a lot of players are going to be quite annoyed with what I'm going to be saying here, because these aircraft tend to be more common for revenge bomb. Now, revenge bomb is an entirely different subject, and I'm probably going to talk about it at some point, especially SP costs in Ground RB. And this is something that might be a bit controversial, but we'll obviously talk about it anyway, because people do want to know how to use these to best effect. Now, the important thing is to not kamikaze, because you're just throwing away your plane. You're killing one tank, which probably killed you in Ground RB, because a lot of people tend to do that, and you're not really accomplishing anything. All you're doing is just pissing that player off. The important thing is if you have multiple types of bombs, so for example, I'll briefly switch to a P-47 here. We obviously have two 1,000 pound bombs and a 500 pound bomb in this aircraft's case. This would be a better example to use, but the Thunderbolt fully loaded is a bit of a brick, so I'm not going to use this for the example. But the point I'm trying to make here is you still have to study what anti-aircraft systems you're going to be running into, enemy aircraft, tanks you're going to be running into, and potentially where you can get away with potentially not being 100% accurate with the bomb. With a larger bomb like this, you tend to be able to get away with a little less accurate drops due to the size of the bomb and the explosive mass. But of course, this entirely depends on the bomb that you have. So it is important to study the bomb that you're obviously using. As you can see there, this bomb has 318.48 kilos of bomb explosive mass. Very high, to be honest. A lot of bombs at this sort of BR aren't as powerful. And this is a very, very effective bomb. But of course, it's not always going to be guaranteed. So make sure to study the bomb. What you'll also want to pay attention to is the radius of fragment dispersion in the case of this bomb. In the case of a 500-pound bomb, it's not as dangerous, so you will need to set a 1.5 to 2 second fuse for that. But in the case of this bomb, 507 feet is quite a lot of fragment dispersion. What this means is if you're not at that safety zone, you're going to get damaged and possibly destroy yourself with your own bomb. What this means is it's important to test for bomb fuses. Now for these sorts of bombs, I run 2 seconds. This is a safe avenue of bomb fuse. You can sometimes get away with 1.5 depending on the aircraft. Obviously in the case of a Corsair you probably could. But for this example, I'll be using a 2 second fuse. But anyway, less of me blabbering about it. Let's go take a look in the test flight. And welcome to the test flight. Obviously there's no tank for me to show an example here, but the howitzers are small enough to demonstrate on. So as I've said, if you've jumped here from obviously the start of the video, I'll obviously talk about it again. If you've already watched the entire thing so far, I apologise for repeating myself, but obviously some people do skip ahead, so it's important to not skip detail and everything, so I do apologise for that. But anyway, so you've got to imagine, in the case of this test flight, that this small island over here is a tank RB match. So the important thing is to look out for any potential targets that you can go for. What I mean by that is, obviously we're going to go for one of these howitzers, but you've got to think of enemy SPAA. These are quite important and they can be very detrimental to your aircraft. Now obviously I'm going to be demonstrating with both mouse and pitch, as in keyboard pitch, so that way it's covering both, shall we say, avenues, so to speak. So I'm going to start off with mouse aim. So as I mentioned before, you are going to want to keep an eye out for enemy aircraft, anti-aircraft guns, and don't fly in a straight line. Try and be unpredictable. Maneuver accordingly, and maneuver like so. Now obviously with a 1,000-pound bomb, as I mentioned in the opening part of this, you can afford to not be direct. That was not a direct hit, and if that was a tank, it'd probably be dead depending on if it's a KV-1 or not. This is important to do, because at the end of the day, mouse aim is a lot harder to actually do it in than keyboard pitch, because with a keyboard pitch, like so, you can be a lot more, you can focus on a lot more things with a keyboard pitch. Now, there is a bug at the moment, which you've probably noticed, where my throttle drops to 47%. That's due to a bug with the throttle access at the minute. I don't know why it does that, but just bear that in mind. So now I'm going to do an attack run with the keyboard pitch. So I'm going to line myself up, like so, and now I'm purely going to use the keyboard pitch. So obviously, roll axis, yaw axis, are all going to be controlled by the keyboard. So in this case, you can see I can maneuver the aircraft a lot more efficiently. But then at the last minute, as I said, with an MS, you will obviously get used to this with a bit more practice. I'm still not 100% accustomed to it, because I'm still learning myself. It is something you can use to benefit your accuracy, but also your survivability. You can kill your targets, and most likely not take any damage once you get completely used to it. So, give it a try. If you don't like keyboard pitch, just go back to mouse. I've already shown you how to do that. So, why not give it a try on both? See if you like it. If you don't, it's your choice. It's all down to personal preference. Anyway, let's move on to the last aircraft, and I'll see you shortly. And now we move on to a vehicle that really shouldn't be used for its bomb load, but, well, I couldn't really think of anything else to really demonstrate with here. Now, obviously, in the case of a large aircraft like the P-8 or a Wellington, with the large bombs that they carry, you shouldn't really be dive bombing. You should be using the bomb site that they provide, and that'll be more than enough, to be honest. And if you need a dive bombing tutorial for those, just fly in as hard as you can, drop the bomb with a half-second fuse, drop it on the enemy team, and just hope for the best. That's the best way I can suggest it. But obviously, in the larger case of an aircraft like this, you're a much larger target than something like a Corsair. That means planning attack runs with this is a lot trickier. But it also means you can afford to be a little bit less careful with your bomb fuses, because these aircraft can be quite tanky. But obviously, because you're going to be mainly getting shrapnel in the tail, you do have to consider the aircraft's tail control and everything. So it is important to know that. Now, of course, with a larger aircraft like this, it's important to study the bombs. Now, obviously, we've already covered the 500-pounder so far in this demonstration video. But the important thing is that I'm obviously mentioning it here because this is the largest bombs the PBJ carries. In real life, the PBJ had the exact same bomb load as a B-25, so it should have the 1,000 pounds, but, well, Gaijin are lazy and don't want to give us that, but you get my point. So it's important to study the bomb and the fragment dispersion radius. This is because you don't want to obviously damage yourself to the point where you can't fly back to base to get more bombs, or you can't continue using bombs because you've only dropped one and you've blown yourself up practically with a half-second fuse. It's important to study this, and obviously in the case of the PBJ, I would probably run a 1.5 to 1 second fuse. I'd be 1.5 to be more on the safe side, but you can be a bit more daredevil with 1 second if you've got more speed behind you. But for this example, I'm going to use 1.5 seconds. This is quite safe for this bomb to use, and obviously with the PBJ being larger, it might just help. But of course, in some cases, 2 seconds might even be required depending on the aircraft type and obviously the bomb it carries. Some aircraft can carry 1,000 pound bombs that are just as big as a PBJ, and heck, if you use a B-25, they do have the 1,000 pound bombs, so 2 to maybe even 3 second fuses might just be necessary, but it's important to study that. So, let's jump into a test flight and let's get to that. And welcome to the test flight. As you can see, I'm just getting a bit of a feel for the PBJ just so I can have a bit of practice with it. It is a rather cumbersome aircraft, especially at lower speeds, so we are going to have to take this into consideration when it comes to our attack runs. Now, with an aircraft like this, you can't really do high-angle attack runs. You can, but it takes forever to get in those positions. So it's important to line the aircraft up like so, and go for a conventional dive-bombing attack. As I said, 2 second fuse. Very easy to line up something like this on target, even though the rudder axis is not great, but that's an entirely different subject. With an aircraft like the PBJ, its main focus is the 75mm cannon, but in some cases, you are obviously going to need the bombs, and they can come in handy. But of course, most people prefer firing that, let's be realistic. I don't know why my aircraft is reloading the weapon now, but whatever. But anyway, so as I said, when it comes to dealing with things in the PBJ, you have to consider anti-aircraft and everything. Charging in without considering enemy anti-aircraft is a surefire way to get yourself killed. Now obviously the PBJ has EFS, so it does have a bit of extra survivability. But it's not always going to be that way. So when it comes to leading a target with a bigger aircraft, you've got to think, where will your opponent go? Now obviously that truck, I know exactly where it drives, so that's easy. But some opponents, myself included, will probably slam on the brakes to make sure you don't get an accurate bomb drop. So study your opponent's movements and study the best approach angles. Don't be the one to hit a tree if you can avoid it. And obviously with a larger aircraft, you are more vulnerable to something like an anti-aircraft gun, and you are more vulnerable to something like a fighter. So make sure to consider this. And obviously pitch and all that, with mouse aim included, isn't always guaranteed. So like for example, if you went for a bomb drop which was a bit off, fair enough, in that case I got it, which was complete blind luck, but it's not always going to be able to be done, so do consider that. But once you get used to it, maybe this might work for you, but I would stick to more fighters and attack aircraft like an IL-2, not something large and cumbersome like a PBJ. Anyway, time to head back to the hangar, and I will demonstrate how to set up your controls so you can do pretty much what I'm doing now. See you shortly. So, if you've skipped here from the part, as previously mentioned, if you've skipped here from the beginning, that's completely fine. I'm obviously not expecting people to sit through the entire video learning about all the individual ways to attack, how my mindset works for engaging ground RB tanks and all that, and overall planning my attack routes, things like that really. I'm not expecting people to. So, why do I think that using this and setting it up comfortably is ideal? Well, obviously, I'm so used to using mouse because I'm just lazy. I can't be bothered. But obviously, some people they will prefer to use they will just prefer to use a mouse aim. But a lot of people have been turning towards keyboard usage, which obviously I'm going to demonstrate. So obviously you can set it for your throttle as well. Obviously I was using R because it's just easier that way. Because as I said, with that bug, it was just easier for me to use my left hand to focus on the throttle. But obviously in the throttle axis, I would obviously set it to W and S like a lot of people would. But this isn't important. It's this bit that's important. So as you can see, we have the roll axis, which is for your ailerons. We have the pitch axis, which is for your elevators, and we have the yaw axis, which is for your rudder. Now, obviously, you can adjust this to however you like, because at the end of the day, finding something that's comfortable for you is important. But I typically kept it to what would be the stereotypical roll, pitch, yaw, what most players tend to use. So we have D, which obviously rolls the right aileron. We have A, which rolls the left aileron, which means you can adjust your control that way. You have your pitch, which is W, so that pitches the elevators upwards, so you can go up. And S, which pitches the elevators down. Now, of course, as I said, you can adjust this to whatever you prefer. If you're left-handed, so if you're left-handed, you can use your right hand to maybe use, I don't know, I, K, O, L, etc. You can adjust it how you like. But at the end of the day, adjust it to what you think is comfortable. Don't listen to people who say, oh, you have to keep it this way, blah, blah, blah. It is your personal preference. Whatever works for you, works for you. Focus on yourself, not others. And finally, we come to the yaw axis, which is of course the rudder. This tends to be, in something like a PBJ, a little bit harder to actually use, but it's important to make sure you can do that. So I bet you're thinking, how do you actually set yourself up this? So for this example, I'm going to eliminate the pitch axis because I don't tend to use that, and I'm going to demonstrate it because it's the same for all of these on how to set it up. So the way to do this is to go to not assigned or one of the ones that you want to change, and you either clear it if you need to reset it, or you can press edit axis. So I'll go to edit axis and go to maximum value. You then click assign button. So you can assign any button you wish to assign your throttle slash pitch, yaw, etc. You get my point. So I'm going to set it to W, which is what I prefer. Then I'm going to go to minimum value and set S. Now, obviously, this is if you're mainly a mouse player like me. I just prefer it because it's more comfortable for me. It's less work on the old joints because when you're double jointed and dyspraxic, it's a little bit hard on the old joints. And there's a reason why I take cod liver oil at night, but that's an entirely different subject. So do make sure to obviously consider this, and this is something you'll need to obviously get used to. But obviously, this is the same for all of these. do make sure to practice. Don't half-ass it, because if you set your controls up and you make a mistake, you could potentially cost your team the match, you could potentially cause an aircraft to lose control, or you might pitch wrong and then, or roll or yaw, and you'll crash and you'll wonder what the heck's happening. Make sure to practice, and make sure to use this to benefit your dive bombing runs, and most importantly, just overall health of your aircraft. But I hope that covers everything, and well, obviously not everything, because there's a lot I've actually skipped. You'll be surprised how much is actually skipped in this video today. But I hope that briefly demonstrates how I would do it. Obviously, I don't tend to use keyboard, so it's something that I'm not 100% used to. But it is something you'll obviously have to consider if you want to be a keyboard, shall we say, mainly keyboard user, or you want to be a mouse user mainly, but obviously have the keyboard for like throttle and bomb dropping and stuff. At the end of the day, set it up how you want and everything like that. And if you want any more tips, because I actually do have a few more, there will be, well, you're more than welcome to ask me in the comments below. You're more than welcome to ask me in my Discord server, which will also be linked below. So please do feel free to do that. But anyway, I really hope you enjoyed seeing this video today. It is obviously skipping quite a lot in terms of detail, because obviously some vehicles have bomb sites which you can use. So it's obviously not covering everything, but if I was to do that, it'd probably be like an hour long. But anyway, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. Hope you enjoyed seeing this updated dive bombing guide to War Thunder. Obviously, it's quite brief comparing to some of the ones that are potentially out there. But obviously, this is more catered towards newer players that may want to learn from that. Anyway, I'll leave you all to it for today, and I'll see you all on the next one.